So this is case study number 2, and in this video I'm going to show you how I shot this photo. Now, it is actually very difficult to find a unique and interesting composition when you're in the middle of a forest. It's difficult to be able to isolate and locate something that is interesting. So in this video, I will show you how I went to the town of Leavenworth, Washington, and found this photo. So starting at the beginning, I would be remiss if I did not tell you that finding this particular composition was extremely challenging. I had never been to this particular area before, which is near the town of Leavenworth in Washington State, and I knew that there were some really nice looking aspen trees in that area, but I didn't know where they were. So I'm looking for that perfect composition, but wow, is it ever tough to find. This bush is just so dense. And in order to really be able to get a good photo, you have to have some kind of a clear spot where you can shoot into the edge of something. I was looking for a photo that looked kind of like birch trees that were poking up out of foliage with nice white trunks. And I wanted there to be a significant amount of contrast between the white on the trunks and the foliage at the bottom. And I actually thought that this would be a relatively easy composition to find. So together with landscape photographer Chris Collicott, we started driving around, and for 3 days we explored practically every single back road in the area of Leavenworth looking for this type of a composition. We found some other interesting compositions like frozen leaves or an old road that's covered in fallen leaves. We found a really nice river with beautiful reflection. So we found this river right beside the highway. There's one part of the river where the water is flowing very smoothly. It creates a still water type of effect and makes for some great reflections. We found what I consider to be a pretty nice stand of aspen trees coming up out of a yellowish type of undergrowth, and that looked good. We found a leading line of a nice curvy road lined with beautiful fall colors on both sides, and found some other aspen trees with lots of yellow leaves. We found a beautiful river with a nice curve on it that created a curved leading line, but to my great disappointment, we had still not been able to find a stand of white-trunked aspen trees or birch trees coming up out of a really nice, colorful, ground-level foliage. I was looking for that stark contrast between tree trunk and foreground. So what we realized after hiking around in the bush for 3 straight days is that we were going to need to be at the side of a road so that we could be standing on the road and therefore standing in a clearing and looking into the foliage, looking into a stand of trees. We're actually thinking that this might even be the most beautiful shot of the whole trip. What made this area so good is that the highway level was maybe 4 or 5 feet higher than the surrounding ground. And that gave us that ability to get up above the foliage, because the foliage was actually probably about easily 5 feet high, like almost 2 meters high. I wanted to ensure that there was a nice separation line between ground foliage and tree trunks, and where to put that line, let's just call it the horizon line. Where to put it is a big question that you have to ask yourself going in. And using the rule of thirds, I thought that it would just make sense that the horizon line was on the bottom third. So that's the way that I formed the composition on this particular shot. And I was also noticing that there was one particular tree that stood out more than the others. It was a little bit wider, a little bit thicker, and it was a little bit closer to the camera. And so I decided as well to put that tree on one of the vertical third lines. So I have 2 third lines going using the rule of thirds. One is the horizon line, and the second is where I'm putting the most prominent tree. The most prominent tree that would catch your eye and draw your eye. It's 7:45 a.m. and we are at the shooting location. We don't have any fog between the trees, which is what we were hoping for, but nonetheless, this is a gorgeous spot. We've got beautiful fall colors in oranges, yellows, browns, and we've got these beautiful birch aspen trees with white trunks. And they make for such beautiful contrast. So I liked the setup. Now, what was really interesting was that as I was standing there looking into this stand of aspen trees, it was messy. It was busy. It was a complicated composition. And this wasn't what I was looking for. And I just had to have some faith and really some vision. That's the best word. You need vision for this kind of a photo shoot. Vision that when I get home and I put the photo into Lightroom, that I was going to be able to do something almost, I don't want to say magical, but really transform the photo to make it more contrasty and more colorful than what I was actually seeing with my eyes. Because as I stood there looking at the photo just with my eyes and looking on the back of my camera, it did not appeal to me very much. I really, really needed to have this sense of vision that I was going to be able to enhance the white color on the tree trunks much more than they actually were in real life, so that I would create that sense of contrast. Because what I was looking for in the end was a simple photo, uncomplicated, almost a minimalist photo where there were just really two things. There were vertical tree trunks and there was colorful foliage in the foreground. Just two things. And seeing all the branches poking up everywhere in every single direction was not adding to that simplistic composition that I was looking for. So the one thing that I hope you can take away from the shooting stage on this was that sense of vision that was required, that I knew that I could transform the photo using Lightroom into something that looked even better than in real life. Now, in terms of the camera settings, of course, I had my camera on a tripod, and for this particular shot, I shot it in using bracketing. So I knew that I was going to use HDR in order to process the photo ultimately. I didn't really need to, but I just did it anyway. Because when you use bracketing, you are able to capture the brightest brights and the darkest darks. And everything in between is going to be, there's going to be light information for it. So I set my camera with bracketing so that there would be 3 photos taken. One was at -2 EV, so that was the dark one. One of them was at 0 EV, so that's the middle one. And the bright one was at +2 EV. For focus point was very, very important for this shot because I wanted to make sure that that tree in the foreground was not going to be out of focus. I find that in these landscape shots, if anything's going to be out of focus, it's the near ground stuff typically. So I set my focus point on that widest tree. As it turned out, everything in the background, for the most part, was in focus, so that was great. So those were the camera settings. Now, if you were taking this shot and you wanted to just do this in the most simplistic way, the way that I would do it is to set the camera on aperture priority and think about how much depth of field do you want with the shot? Do you want everything in focus? And the answer to that is yes. So I would go set it in aperture priority and use an f-stop or aperture setting with a high number. I generally don't want to use a high number that's higher than f13 because you introduce diffraction into your photo, which is a softening of the image. So if you wanted to ensure everything was absolutely in focus, then go aperture priority, f13, have the camera on a tripod, make sure you're not touching the camera with your hand as you're taking the photo, so use either a wired shutter release or set your timer on a 2-second delay and you won't get any camera shake then. And then I am ready for the actual picture taking. I took a lot of photos before I came up with this one composition. So it's really a trial and error type of situation. Shoot and move is what I always say. Shoot and then recompose, move, recompose, move. And that way you're more sure to get something that you really love when you get home. So let's talk about the composition that I used here. So this was kind of one of the rare times where I actually used the rule of thirds as being somewhat the main aspect of the composition. So here's what I mean. When you look at the photo, you'll notice that there's sort of a horizon line, so to speak, where everything down below is all the red-orange foliage. And you will easily and quickly see that I put this horizon line on the bottom third line like that. Then there's the top third line. There's nothing on the top third line. Then, of course, there's our right third. There's nothing there. And our left third. And if you notice, there's one tree that is much more prominent than the rest. And that tree is exactly going down the left third line, like so. So bottom third, it was the horizon. Left third was the main subject. This one tree here really is the hero of the story, and it's on the third line. So there is a sense of balance and symmetry because we have an even distribution of trees going all the way throughout the frame. There's also the aspect of leading lines where you have all of these straight lines that are going across. And there isn't framing and there is not reflections. So this is working with rule of thirds, balance and symmetry, and leading lines. So see, we're stacking 3 of the rules of composition inside one frame. And that's what makes this usually very busy composition, it makes it work. Because we are stacking the rules of composition, we found 3 rules that we could stack into one photo. So I would encourage you, wherever possible, stack the rules of composition, utilize every rule that you can inside one frame, and it's going to make for a more interesting photo in a place where normally it's very difficult to find a good composition.